I am Kendra Gonzales, 34, a senior sales executive in Boston. The text message vibrated, shaking my focus from $1 million contract. It was short, impersonal, and straight to the point. Lucas's graduation is Saturday. You're invited. The cold tone instantly teleported me back 10 years. I could still hear my father's voice echoing in the family kitchen. Kendra, you'll never make a living selling words. I looked down at the unread message, a surge of suppressed pride and old nostalgia fighting within me. I typed, sure. I'll be there, and hit send. But when the people who dismissed your entire career finally invite you back into their world, do you show up to seek approval, or to silently execute the ultimate professional revenge? The Gonzales family didn't live by dreams, we lived by rigid definitions of success. My father, Robert, a repair technician, worshipped practicality. Everything had to be quantifiable, tangible. He saw the world in broken circuits and predictable formulas. My mother, Eleanor, managed a retail store with strict pride. She valued stability. My younger brother, Lucas, was the golden boy, the one who got the engineering degree and the safe career path. I was the talker, the one who could sell an idea but was always deemed the riskier asset. For years, I chased their definition of success and fell short. But how do you prove your worth when your greatest talent, the very thing that makes you unstoppable, is the one thing your family taught you to be ashamed of? I left home at 24. No scholarship, just a suitcase and a sheer will for self-determination. 10 years later, I'm one of the top senior sales executives at a global tech firm. My apartment in Back Bay overlooks the city I helped build, client by client. This is my unrecognized triumph. Yet, the family narrative hasn't changed. They still treat my career as a temporary hustle, a glamorous riskier asset that could implode at any moment. They equate commissions with instability. My six-figure salary, my solvency, means nothing compared to Lucas's predictable hourly wage. I no longer argue. I hide my success, tired of constantly proving my integrity against their deep-seated practicality. It's exhausting to win every professional battle only to lose the personal war for validation. They always said I was just talking for rent money. But what happens when the girl they called a talker returns with a voice so powerful it dictates terms, sets boundaries, and quietly sells her family the very definition of success they rejected? My first job wasn't glamorous, selling complex point-of-sale software to skeptical small shop owners. The office was dingy, the pay was minimum plus commission. It was the opposite of my father's prized practicality, but for the first time, I felt an innate sense of purpose. What others called aggressive selling or manipulation, I called genuine connection. Sales wasn't about talking at people, it was about listening for the problem they couldn't articulate. For the first time, I felt seen for my instincts, not judged by a rigid measure of success. I found my power in the place they rejected. But how long can that passion sustain you when every time you call home to share a triumph, it's met not with pride, but with cruel, dismissive laughter? I finally closed my first big deal, a 6-month contract, a huge commission check. I called home, bursting with the kind of hope I hadn't felt since childhood. I wanted my parents' pride, their validation that my risky career choice was a legitimate path to solvency. Eleanor laughed. A short, dismissive sound that cut deeper than any rejection from a client. Her voice, sharp and laced with mockery, selling? That's not a career, honey. That's talking for rent money. The line went silent, filled only with my overwhelming shame. That laughter was the ultimate sales pitch for my revenge. But when they use mockery to enforce their rigid definition of success, do you abandon your passion in doubt? Or do you channel that shame and turn it into the quiet, relentless determination to prove them wrong? Their laughter didn't break me, it forged me. It was the purest fuel for the fire I needed. If they saw my career as temporary, I would make it permanent. I began showing up first and leaving last, driven by a quiet, relentless determination to achieve absolute solvency. I shadowed senior reps, studied negotiation psychology, and devoured every book on business strategy. Every rejection wasn't a failure, it was data, meticulously categorized and analyzed. I systematically turned every one of my talking instincts into a refined, high-value skill. Every no made me sharper, more effective, and closer to my self-determination. The only validation I sought was my bank balance and my commission sheet. But even after years of professional triumph, when your family deliberately ignores your success and chooses to celebrate someone else, how do you handle the quiet, persistent sting of that calculated dismissal? The hustle became mastery. My company awarded me the top 1% performer distinction for closing the most complex enterprise deals. It was the highest professional validation of my skill and self-determination. I framed the article, then took a picture and sent it home. The reply from Robert arrived within minutes, brief and brutally efficient. It wasn't praise, it was an exercise in strategic dismissal. That's nice. But your brother Lucas got a full scholarship for his MBA now. That's a real investment in the future. The implication was clear. My sales success was a fleeting riskier asset. The burst of pride I'd hoped to feel turned into cold, silent bitterness. I realized the true obstacle wasn't my career. It was their rigid practicality that couldn't comprehend unquantifiable connection or integrity. The emotional reward I sought was permanently withdrawn. All that remained was cold resolve. The invitation to Lucas's graduation arrived right as I had finally given up on their approval. But when the cold invitation forces you to return to the heart of their judgment, do you go seeking validation one last time? Or do you enter their world with an inner strength so quiet and profound that it changes the dynamics forever? The invitation to Lucas's graduation felt less like a celebration and more like a carefully crafted challenge. It was the family's annual financial audit, and I was the questionable riskier asset up for review. I flew in from Boston, dressed sharply, every detail of my attire calculated to convey unwavering solvency. I rehearsed polite smiles and non-committal answers in the rental car. I knew they would measure me against the practicality of Lucas's new degree and his guaranteed success. But I wasn't the girl who left a decade ago, chasing their approval. I was here on my own terms, with quiet, professional integrity. Walking into the auditorium, I felt an uneasy pride. I saw my parents beaming at Lucas. I felt a fleeting desire for that same spotlight. But then I reminded myself, my triumph is built on actual deals, not potential. That inner determination was my armor. I was calm, controlled, and financially untouchable. But can even the strongest inner armor protect you when your family gathers, not just to celebrate, but to wield their approval as a weapon and reinforce your place as the black sheep? The graduation felt like a carefully staged performance of my family's old hierarchy. Eleanor, radiating an air of untouchable superiority, immediately began bragging about Lucas's business degree, emphasizing its predictable path to success. I smiled, a polite, impenetrable mask of composure. Robert, my father, didn't waste a moment before striking with the familiar, belittling humor. He nudged Lucas and said loud enough for the group to hear, "Maybe now you can teach your sister how real finance works, Lucas. You know, without all those risky commissions." The table chuckled politely. I felt the old wound throb, but years of professional negotiation had honed my self-control. I picked up my glass of sparkling water, maintaining eye contact. I didn't defend my six-figure job or my solvency. I simply smiled and sipped the water, letting my silence communicate my unshakable integrity. I was finally master of my own reaction, refusing to give them the emotional leverage they craved. But how far can silent composure take you when the universe itself sets up a dramatic, ironic collision between your family's most treasured venue and your most confidential professional triumph? I retreated to my hotel room before the graduation dinner, needing space to process the resurfacing family dynamics. I wasn't just Kendra, the dismissed talker anymore. I was a senior sales executive, and I treated this dinner like any complex enterprise deal, analyzing the strategy, anticipating the pressure points. I opened my laptop to review the presentation deck for my biggest prospect this quarter, a major restaurant chain expanding across the Southeast. I scrolled through the corporate profile, then froze. The logo on the slide matched the branding of the restaurant hosting Lucas's graduation dinner. The universe had delivered the perfect ironic setup. I closed the laptop, a slow smile spreading across my face. Tomorrow morning, I wouldn't just be signing a service contract, I'd be signing a deal with the very venue hosting my family's celebration of my brother's real career. This was fate handing me the ultimate, professional, and quiet triumph. My goal shifted instantly. It was no longer about defending my six-figure salary or my solvency. It was about a strategic, surgical operation. I would execute my business skill right under the noses of the people who dismissed it as a temporary hustle. My integrity would speak louder than their superiority. I stood by the hotel window, overlooking the city lights. This was the moment I stopped hoping for their approval and started owning my power. My self-determination was absolute. I was the master of my own asset, untouchable by their judgment. I put on my most formidable dress. The quiet storm was ready. The stage was set, the cast was gathered, and the irony was exquisite. But when you are finally presented with the opportunity to expose the true scale of your power, do you use it for petty revenge? Or do you choose a demonstration so coolly professional that it leaves no room for doubt or defense? The graduation dinner was held in the restaurant's private, elegant dining room, a setting that only amplified the family's manufactured superiority. Eleanor, emboldened by the audience of extended family, stood to give a toast, her eyes sweeping over me with deliberate detachment. I braced myself. She raised her glass. We celebrate Lucas tonight, our practical success story. He's always been responsible, focused on a real career path, unlike some people who chase risky commissions and temporary hustle. The laughter that followed was light, but it sliced through my composure like glass. It was a public dismissal. Robert nodded approvingly. I felt the familiar, hot surge of anger trying to break through my professional veneer. But I had prepared for this moment. I would not give them the emotional reaction they needed to validate their superiority. My face remained an elegant mask of self-control. I raised my own glass, a deliberate, slow movement, commanding quiet attention. My voice was soft, perfectly level, resonating with unshakable integrity. To responsibility, I said softly, my eyes meeting my mother's. And to the understanding that solvency and genuine asset ownership come in many forms, the silence that followed was heavy. They didn't understand the depth of my statement, but they sensed the quiet power behind it. It was the moment I realized that their judgment was utterly meaningless. I was ready to leave. I had endured the judgment, now I just needed to survive the dessert course before executing my final strategy. I had survived the public attack, turning their mockery into a quiet promise of war. But as I sat there, ready to leave, would the universe allow this moment of calculated dismissal to pass quietly, or was a twist of fate about to reveal the true scale of my professional triumph to the entire table? I excused myself from the table, needing a breath of fresh, unjudged air. The private room was suffocating, thick with manufactured superiority and old family poison. I needed to step away from the emotional dynamics before I broke my self-control. I stood outside, overlooking the glittering Orlando skyline. For years, every deal, every promotion, every six-figure commission was dedicated to silencing my father's voice. You'll never make a living selling words. I realized I had spent 10 years pursuing an impossible audit of my life. That relentless hunger for their validation was an unconditional liability on my emotional balance sheet. I let their rigid, fear-based definition of practicality undermine my actual, verifiable solvency. They weren't holding the power, I was granting it to them. That realization was my first, truest act of self-determination. My success stands, whether or not they believe in it. My Boston apartment, my portfolio, and my career asset, they exist independently of the Gonzales family dynamics. I established the ultimate boundary. I no longer needed their emotional signature on my life's contract. The transaction was closed. True triumph isn't forcing them to apologize, it's recognizing they are irrelevant to my life's purpose. I was chasing a phantom approval, when I should have been focused on my professional integrity and the value I create. The freedom from seeking their validation was a six-figure payout in itself. I realized I was sitting on the opposite side of the table now. They were trapped in their limited world of practicality and petty judgment. I operated in the world of high-level strategy and immense solvency. Their disapproval was simply the noise of a small, outdated system unable to process my massive upgrade. And then, the ultimate punchline, tomorrow, I would be signing a deal with this very restaurant chain. This wasn't about revenge, it was about the universe confirming my self-determination. I was about to execute a major business triumph in the immediate vicinity of their public dismissal. I took a deep breath. I didn't need to gloat, I didn't need to shout. The ultimate revenge wasn't a confrontation. It was the silent, unshakable truth of my independent reality. I would re-enter the room calm, ready, and utterly unconcerned with their opinion. My power was internal and absolute. My career value as a producer was easily in the multi-millions, they were simply the audience, and the show was about to begin. The girl they called a talker was about to let her asset speak for itself. I straightened my shoulders and walked back toward the private dining room, calm and ready. I returned to the table, prepared to let the chips fall where they may. But when you have finally reclaimed your power and are no longer seeking validation, what single, devastating sentence, delivered by a total stranger, will finally shatter the family's carefully constructed narrative of superiority? I re-entered the room, my composure absolute. I sat down, ready to endure the final moments of the celebration before exiting gracefully. My revenge wasn't loud, it was the quiet, undeniable power of my professional reality. The waiter arrived with a lavish dessert, followed by the restaurant manager, smiling broadly. The manager, a sharp man named David, approached the head of the table. "Mr. and Mrs. Gonzales, congratulations on your son's graduation. We appreciate your choosing us for this special event. This location is particularly meaningful for us, as we've just secured a major new partner for our system upgrade. Eleanor, always focused on superiority in business, immediately seized the conversation. "Oh, a system upgrade? Fascinating. Who sells that kind of high-level enterprise tech? I assume it's a large, established firm, someone with practicality and proven integrity, not one of those startup riskier assets." The question hung in the air, the precise moment where their manufactured reality was about to collide with my documented triumph. I felt a jolt of shock, quickly replaced by cold, professional resolve. I kept my eyes on my dessert, refusing to engage, letting the strategy unfold naturally. David the manager turned, gesturing smoothly across the table, directly at me. "Actually, ma'am, the deal was closed by a phenomenal senior executive. Her company provides the system. She's the one who closed our deal yesterday." The family table went deathly silent. My mother's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Robert's face paled, his superiority collapsing like a poorly managed asset. Lucas, however, looked genuinely impressed. The irony was physically palpable, radiating from the very chair I sat in, my power finally acknowledged. The silence was the sweetest sound I had ever heard, the sound of their entire, rigid world finally breaking. But what final, coolly delivered line does the talker use in this moment of silent, devastating triumph to definitively close the chapter on their doubt and reclaim her self-determination? David's words hung in the silence. The family's carefully constructed narrative about my risky commissions and temporary hustle had been instantly demolished by an outside, credible source. Eleanor looked at the manager, then at me, searching for the lie. David, oblivious to the family dynamics, turned back to me, extending his hand. Ms. Gonzales, I'm honored to finally meet you. The system your team designed is exactly the strategy we needed for our expansion. It's a huge asset for our solvency. He shook my hand, the ultimate, silent validation of my power. Lucas broke the tension with genuine pride. Kendra, that's incredible. You're closing multi-million-dollar deals with corporate clients? His validation, unlike our parents, was pure, without judgment. For the first time, I felt a flash of true familial connection, untainted by their rigid practicality. Robert finally found his voice, laced with disbelief and a hint of new, desperate respect. Wait. You're the one who sold them the system for this building? He looked at me, hoping I would downplay it. This was the moment for my definitive answer. My voice, calm and clear, carried the weight of my 10-year self-determination. David's words hung in the silence. The family's carefully constructed narrative about my risky commissions and temporary hustle had been instantly demolished by an outside, credible source. Eleanor looked at the manager, then at me, searching for the lie. David, oblivious to the family dynamics, turned back to me, extending his hand. Ms. Gonzales, I'm honored to finally meet you. The system your team designed is exactly the strategy we needed for our expansion. It's a huge asset for our solvency. He shook my hand, the ultimate, silent validation of my power. Lucas broke the tension with genuine pride. Kendra, that's incredible. You're closing multi-million-dollar deals with corporate clients? His validation, unlike our parents, was pure, without judgment. For the first time, I felt a flash of true familial connection, untainted by their rigid practicality. Robert finally found his voice, laced with disbelief and a hint of new, desperate respect. Wait. You're the one who sold them the system for this building? He looked at me, hoping I would downplay it. This was the moment for my definitive answer. My voice, calm and clear, carried the weight of my 10-year self-determination. I didn't look back. Walking away from the dining room, I finally felt the 10-year weight of seeking their approval lift from my shoulders. It was the purest form of self-determination. In the cab to the airport, I didn't feel glee, I felt a quiet, profound melancholy. The truth of the triumph was this: it changed my life, but it didn't change them. Their core belief in rigid practicality and manufactured superiority was too deeply embedded. Even after the manager's confirmation, Robert was likely calculating how much more money I was now risking with my high commissions. But their failure to understand was no longer my failure to be understood. My solvency was mine alone. My power was not derived from their validation but from my skill and integrity. I had won the war, not for their respect, but for my own emotional redemption. The transaction was truly closed. Later, in the first-class lounge, my phone vibrated. A text from Lucas: I'm proud of you, Kendra. You didn't just win a deal, you won the argument we've been having for 10 years. You showed them what real asset ownership looks like. It was the only validation I ever truly needed, simple and pure. Back in my Boston apartment, overlooking the financial district, I poured myself a drink. The city lights, my city, built on my sales strategy, shimmered. The feeling wasn't exhilarating, it was the quiet sense of purpose that comes from aligning your life with your self-determination. I blocked my parents' numbers. My life had moved beyond their emotional dynamics. The most professional thing I ever did wasn't closing the deal, it was establishing a permanent, unbreachable boundary. My success was the wall, my integrity was the foundation, and my peace was the quiet reward. The story of professional revenge was over, but the quiet work of healing had just begun. But how do you transform the pain of family rejection into lasting strategy for the future? And what quiet advice do you give others who are still battling the same rigid practicality of their own families? Robert was the first to break the silence, attempting to regain his shattered composure. He muttered to Eleanor, "It's just one huge sale. Those high commissions don't last. She's still a riskier asset, Eleanor." "We chose practicality," Eleanor, radiating shock and denial, fiercely whispered. She lied. "That deal is a temporary hustle, not true solvency. Your fixation on Lucas's guaranteed paycheck let her walk away and build a fortune." Lucas, sensing the truth, looked genuinely concerned. "Mom, that company is massive. Kendra's been closing deals like this for years. We just refuse to acknowledge her triumph. Our denial doesn't change her power." The extended family, silent witnesses, began whispering. Eleanor's public performance of superiority had spectacularly backfired, exposing their toxic dynamics and desperate detachment to everyone present. Their judgment was now on her. Robert pulled out his phone, not to call me, but to calculate. He Googled my company's stock price, confirming the devastating math. My single commission dwarfed his entire annual wage. His face was a map of cold despair and defeat. Their entire system of value was imploding. Lucas's MBA, their prized asset, felt cheap and small compared to the high-level strategy one wielded. They saw the tangible proof of my skill, and realized their decade of judgment was baseless. Eleanor picked up her phone. Hands trembling, eyes wide with panicked hope. She dialed my number, desperate to salvage their social standing and financial integrity. She needed to regain control of the toxic narrative. I had blocked their numbers hours before, establishing my unbreachable boundary. Eleanor heard only the curt, impersonal "number is no longer available" message. Her face twisted into final, absolute despair. My silence was absolute power. Robert looked down at the untouched dessert, realizing the true nature of his loss. It wasn't just money, it was the connection he had deliberately severed over a rigid definition of success. He saw the daughter he'd written off as a multi-million-dollar asset. My final line, the comparison of the commission to her salary, was the ultimate, lethal blow of pure, professional determination. They were trapped, sitting in the elegant room they had chosen to celebrate one life and dismiss another. They had always been the judges of my self-determination. Now, they were the defendants, found guilty of a spectacular, costly error in judgment. They were trapped in their silent shame. My quiet triumph was achieved with devastating composure. The fear on Eleanor's face was not just fear of loss, but of the sudden, devastating realization that she had irrevocably lost the power to hurt me. She had no emotional leverage left. Their superiority was a bankrupt asset. My revenge was complete. I walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of their practical world. They were just the audience, I was the producer. The dynamic was forever reversed. The first-class seat was my sanctuary. I ordered a glass of champagne, not to celebrate the victory, but to toast the final, complete surrender of my emotional redemption to my own self-determination. The emotional dynamics of the dinner had been exhausting, but the power was finally mine. I opened my laptop to review the final contract for the restaurant deal, treating it like any other piece of business. The work felt clean, purposeful, untainted by the search for validation. That decade-long wait, the constant, silent audit of my solvency, was gone. Landing in Boston, I drove straight to my apartment. Walking through my door, I felt an overwhelming sense of simple, profound peace. This space, purchased with my commissions and built on my professional integrity, was my true asset. No one could change the locks on this home. I poured myself a glass of water, watching the city lights. My triumph wasn't the look on my mother's face, it was the quiet realization that my life strategy had successfully immunized me against their judgment forever. I was home, and I was whole. The emotional battle was won, but the financial opportunity to reshape the future had just arrived. Given their sudden, desperate respect for my power, do I simply walk away, or do I use my superior strategy and solvency to offer them a final, complicated solution that changes their practical life forever. I woke up in the middle of the night. The victory, the adrenaline, the professional composure, it had all burned away, leaving a stark, terrifying silence. The apartment felt huge, empty. My power felt heavy, a burden without the familiar counterweight of their judgment. I walked to the window, looking at the city. And then, without warning, the tears came. Hot, violent, and utterly unprofessional. It wasn't the pain of the argument, it was the realization of the connection that was never real. The grief for the family I thought I had. I had secured my solvency and won my self-determination, but the price was final emotional detachment. They were gone, not just blocked, but excised from my core. The silence was the sound of a major amputation, a necessary but agonizing surgery of the heart. I remembered a small, insignificant moment from my childhood, my mother's genuine smile when I won a school spelling bee. A brief flash of real connection before the focus shifted back to Lucas's practical math skills. The memory was a sharp shard of pain. My multi-million-dollar asset portfolio felt utterly useless against this quiet, personal grief. It highlighted the terrifying flaw in my strategy. I had secured my financial life but left my emotional life exposed and utterly vulnerable. The power of my triumph was cold comfort. I sat on the floor, allowing the wave of despair to wash over me. I wasn't the strong, composed executive anymore. I was the little girl who just wanted her parents' unquantifiable approval. The core pain was not about money, but about the deficit of unconditional love. Slowly, my professional integrity kicked in, serving as a life raft. I had faced hostile takeover bids and near-bankruptcy clients. I could face this emotional dynamic. The goal now wasn't revenge, but integration, integrating the successful professional with the wounded daughter. This grief was the final, necessary cost of my emotional redemption. I needed to feel the full loss to fully appreciate the boundary I had set. The pain was the final signature on the contract of my self-determination. It was done. The violence of the tears subsided, replaced by a quiet, settled calm. I looked at the city again, seeing it not as a monument to my power, but as a home built by my own hands and my own skill. I was not empty, I was simply finished. My mother's change of heart, should it ever come, would be a bonus, not a necessity. My asset was my internal determination. I finally understood the true meaning of solvency, the ability to sustain my own emotional well-being without external validation. The wounds had been exposed, but the healing had begun. But when you've achieved absolute solvency and emotional independence, what is the single, most powerful act you can take to ensure that your carefully constructed boundary remains unbreachable forever? I woke up feeling light, the emotional storm having cleansed the air. The tears had cleared the lens, giving me a moment of profound clarity. I still had a massive asset of power at my disposal, and it was time to use my high-level strategy for construction, not just confrontation. I opened the financial models for my newest venture, a private investment fund specializing in high-growth, riskier assets. I saw the core problem of the Gonzales family. They mistook rigidity for practicality. Their financial health was entirely dependent on Robert's low-yield, safe solvency methods. My revenge was complete, but my integrity demanded one final, elegant move. Not a loan, not a gift. I would structure a single, decisive financial action that forced them to reconsider their entire definition of success and power. This was about teaching a final, lasting lesson. I composed an email to Lucas. Short, professional, devoid of the recent emotional dynamics. I offered him a position as a financial analyst for my new fund, explicitly tasking him with managing a small asset portfolio, the family's low-yield retirement accounts. This wasn't a job for Lucas, it was a Trojan horse. It was a way to bypass Eleanor and Robert's rigid boundary and introduce a high-growth strategy into their stagnant portfolio. Lucas would be the new, recognized power, and his self-determination would be tied to the family's financial future. The financial hook was set, designed not to hurt, but to heal the family's toxic practicality through my superior skill. But will Lucas accept a job that forces him to confront his parents' decades of failed financial strategy? And what will Eleanor and Robert do when they realize the family's financial future now depends entirely on the talker's volatile asset? 2 days passed with no reply from Orlando. Then, a notification: Lucas accepted the offer. His short response was not one of gratitude, but of professional integrity. I'll start building the new portfolio strategy immediately. Send the asset details. It was the perfect professional response, devoid of the toxic family dynamics. Our connection was now rebuilt on a foundation of mutual skill and business respect, not on parental approval. My Trojan horse was inside the walls, ready to bring long-term solvency to the family's outdated system. Eleanor and Robert had remained silent. They knew Lucas was taking the job. The shame was absolute. They couldn't directly confront me due to the financial boundary and my clear power. Their superiority was now secondary to the family's financial determination. My revenge wasn't about public humiliation, it was about forcing them to rely on the very asset they had mocked. Their long-term financial practicality now depended on my high-yield, riskier assets and the saleswoman they called a talker. The irony was the final, satisfying layer of my triumph. I closed the Lucas file. The chapter was shut. My focus now was the future. I had achieved my emotional redemption by proving my value to myself. The old wounds were no longer open, they were simply scars that defined the strength of my self-determination. The biggest takeaway isn't the six-figure commission or the luxury apartment. It's that you cannot allow anyone, especially family, to define your value or your solvency. True power is internal. My strategy was simple: build a life so strong that their doubt became utterly irrelevant. My family may never admit their mistake, but their finances now speak a different language, the language of my asset. So, what is the single, quiet ritual I now perform every morning to reinforce my boundary and remind myself that my true triumph lies not in their shame, but in my own unshakable self-determination? I unblocked their emails for a clean, professional boundary. The response arrived immediately, not a call, but a furious email from Eleanor. The subject line was, "Insulting strategy. How dare you use Lucas as your pawn to force your riskier assets onto our practical accounts? Your solvency may be high, but your emotional integrity is bankrupt." "This is not help, this is a disgusting display of power," Robert quickly replied, all attempting to reclaim the moral high ground. "Kendra, we appreciate the thought, but Lucas should focus on stable careers. Your high commissions are volatile. We prefer reliable, lower-yield asset stability." I drafted my reply. No emotion, only business. I email Eleanor: "Robert, this is Lucas's employment. He manages the family portfolio. He reports only to the fund's chief strategist. I am merely the controlling asset manager. I respect your boundary." That was the final move. By making Lucas the bridge, I forced them to swallow their superiority for the sake of their financial future. The backlash was the last, dying gasp of their toxic dynamics. They had lost the ability to hurt me. I leaned back, looking at the city. My self-determination wasn't just my career, it was the ability to define my relationship with them on my terms. My triumph was the fact that I no longer needed their approval to feel successful or whole. I felt a deep, unexpected surge of empathy. Their rigidity wasn't malice, it was deep-seated fear. Fear of risk, fear of failure, fear of the unknown that lay outside their practical box. I had escaped that fear, they were still imprisoned by it. True solvency wasn't just cash flow, it was mental freedom. The ability to live authentically, without the crippling interest payments of seeking external validation. I had paid off that debt and now operated from a position of profound emotional redemption. I stood up and walked to my window. Every morning, I look at my city, not as a monument, but as a proof of concept. I perform a quiet ritual, a simple affirmation of my skill, my integrity, and my power. This is my final boundary. Lucas, now managing their retirement funds through my fund, was a win-win. He gains experience with high-growth strategy, and the family receives the passive benefit of my superior asset management. I was their unwilling, highly compensated financial savior. To anyone watching, fighting their own battle for self-determination, do the work. Build your asset. Set the boundary. Don't fight for their approval, fight for your own freedom. Your power comes from your skill, not their validation. The story isn't a fairy tale about reconciliation. It's a case study in financial and emotional strategy. I won because I recognized that my family's biggest asset was actually their deepest liability, their rigid, outdated system of practicality. I closed the laptop, the screen going black. The past was closed, the future was financed, and my self-determination was the only thing on my balance sheet that truly mattered. I finally understood what it meant to be irrevocably, successfully, and peacefully free. Kendra, I've seen the numbers. You have my respect. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'll start building the new portfolio strategy immediately. Send the asset details. I promise to move us beyond their definition of practicality. The battle for self-determination is over, the financial lesson delivered, and the ultimate boundary established. But what is the single, most important piece of advice I would give my younger self, and how do I summarize the entire journey for viewers struggling to find their own emotional redemption? I accepted the video call from Lucas late that evening. He didn't look like the overwhelmed graduate anymore. His posture reflected his new power. I saw Mom's email. I deleted it. I need to clarify my boundary with you, Kendra. This is strictly business. I respect the strategy. Our parents needed this intervention. Their definition of practicality was leading them toward stagnation. The family's retirement asset portfolio had zero growth. Your solvency and skill are exactly what we need, even if they can't admit it. Lucas, I didn't set this up for revenge. I set it up for your self-determination. I want you to gain experience managing riskier assets under a high-level strategy. Their acceptance is irrelevant to the triumph of your career. We spent the next hour discussing market dynamics, not family dynamics. We talked about optimizing the family asset portfolio, leveraging my high commissions as anchor investments, and restructuring their debt. It was the best, most authentic connection we'd ever had. They keep saying I need a secure paycheck. But with your fund, I'm building a real asset. I'm earning my triumph on my own terms. Thank you for showing me that a different strategy is possible, Kendra. I ended the call. The final, complex layer of my emotional redemption was complete. The revenge wasn't the confrontation, it was the creation of a system where their judgment became financially moot. My power was now a source of long-term, stable solvency for them. I felt a quiet, profound composure. I had proven my integrity not just by building my fortune, but by using my skill to lift the one person who deserved it. My life, now anchored by my unbreachable boundary, was finally whole. The dynamics were redefined. The story ends not with fire, but with financial restructuring and a quiet, unshakable boundary. But what is the single, most powerful piece of advice I would give my younger self, and how do I summarize the entire journey for viewers struggling to find their own emotional redemption from toxic family dynamics? If I could talk to the Kendra who just left college, desperate for her father's approval, I'd say this: stop looking for validation in others' rigid definitions of practicality. Your true asset is your skill. Trust your self-determination. Power isn't inherited, it's constructed. You build it deal by deal, commission by commission. Each successful strategy is a brick in your fortress. My solvency was just the measurable result of my unwavering integrity over a decade. My quiet ritual every morning is simple. I look at the family photo on my desk, the old one, before the rift, and then I look at my company's logo. It reminds me that my emotional redemption came from accepting the boundary, not destroying the people who necessitated it. The true triumph was shifting the dynamics. I forced the safe people to accept riskier assets managed by the person they distrusted. The revenge wasn't the money, it was the psychological flip, making their financial security dependent on my determination. Lucas is thriving. He's closing deals, learning high-growth strategy, and his latest report shows the family's portfolio is up 15%. His success is my final, passive vindication. He has finally achieved self-determination, a true asset for him, and a silent victory for me. I voice over the pain of rejection doesn't disappear, it gets repurposed. You use that energy, that desperate need for approval, and you funnel it into building something so irrefutable, so financially solvent, that the need for them completely vanishes. My life now is defined by choice, not reaction. I mentor young women in tech sales, montage, Kendra teaching in a modern office. I invest in community assets, montage, Kendra visiting a local business. My power is used to lift others, not to prove a point. My strategy for a new life is simple: integrity first. It brings the best commissions, the most sustainable solvency, and the deepest emotional redemption. You don't need a diploma to be a successful, ethical person, you need determination and skill. I received one final letter from Eleanor. Not an email, a handwritten note. It was a request, not an apology. Could I introduce Lucas to one of my VC contacts for a future asset opportunity? I didn't reply to Eleanor. I emailed Lucas the VC's contact information, copying the fund's chief strategist. I honored the request, but maintained the boundary. My final, most powerful lesson to them was delivered in a simple transaction of business, not emotion. I closed the door on the past, realizing the old me had died in that Orlando restaurant. The new me is defined not by the family I left, but by the community I build and the asset I create. My self-determination is my legacy. To anyone facing that crushing dynamic of familial doubt, your debt is not to them. Your only debt is to your own potential. If they don't see your skill as valuable, make it so financially solvent that they have no choice but to respect the power it generates. The moment you stop seeking their approval is the moment you reclaim your integrity. Build your own table. Your value is inherent, but your asset must be tangible. Use strategy to win your freedom, then use empathy to understand the fear that drove them. This is my family revenge story. It's a tale of emotional redemption and high-stakes finance. I closed the laptop, the screen going black. The past was closed, the future was financed, and my self-determination was the only thing on my balance sheet that truly mattered. I finally understood what it meant to be irrevocably, successfully, and peacefully free. Kendra, I've seen the numbers. You have my respect. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'll start building the new portfolio strategy immediately. Send the asset details. I promise to move us beyond their definition of practicality. The story is complete, but the conversation has just begun. If you were Kendra, what is the single, non-monetary gesture you would make to Lucas to thank him for being the true connection in your family's toxic dynamic? The intense drama of our family dynamics faded into benign bureaucracy. Our contact was now purely transactional, a necessary exchange of documents concerning the family's diversified asset portfolio, overseen by Lucas. This boundary was professional, unbreachable, and peaceful. I realized that the true triumph wasn't the look on Eleanor's face, but the complete liberation from needing to see it again. My self-determination was no longer a rebellious act, it was a settled reality, built on the solid bedrock of my financial solvency and skill. We didn't reconcile, nor did we declare war. We established respectful distance. I provided the strategy and the capital asset, and they accepted the benefit through Lucas. It was a cold, clean contract, upholding professional integrity where emotional connection had failed. People often ask if my power is lonely. It's not. Power built on genuine skill and integrity attracts authentic relationships, people who value me for my character, not my capacity to deliver high commissions or approval. The deepest reward wasn't the increase in my net worth, it was the emotional redemption. I no longer had the financial ghost of my father's judgment haunting my career choices. My final strategy was self-love. It meant choosing my own well-being over their outdated sense of superiority and practicality. It meant not rising to the bait of Eleanor's occasional passive-aggressive email, but simply forwarding it to Lucas with a professional note. Lucas is thriving. He found his own self-determination by accepting my help, turning their toxic dynamics into his professional stepping stone. Look at your life right now. What is your most valuable asset? Is it your income, solvency, or the unquantifiable skill that generates it? Don't let others dictate your value. Build a wall of irrefutable success around your true determination. I've built a new family, a tribe of colleagues, mentors, and friends who operate with the same integrity and high-level strategy. This is where I invest my emotional asset now. My connection is chosen, not assigned. That is the ultimate freedom. The risk of reconciliation isn't just a relapse of the old dynamics, it's the risk of compromising the hard-won boundary. My final, permanent strategy is respectful non-engagement. They are my clients, via Lucas, nothing more. That's the truth of my new practicality. I recently received a certified letter, Robert's signature. They didn't apologize, but they implicitly recognized my superior skill. The ultimate goal wasn't to win the argument, but to stop having it. I achieved that. The old ties didn't break violently, they simply faded into a respectful, transactional hum, the sound of business being done well, separate from the noise of failed approval. This is the end of the script, but the beginning of my unwritten, self-directed life. My determination funded my freedom. My strategy bought my peace. Remember, your worth is non-negotiable, and your asset is your independence. The difference between me and my parents wasn't money. It was the belief that value could be generated outside of their narrow, risk-averse system. I took the risk, I earned the commissions, and I bought the ultimate triumph, the right to never look back. The story is complete, but the conversation has just begun. If you were Kendra, what is the single, non-monetary gesture you would make to Lucas to thank him for being the true connection in your family's toxic dynamic? My life is no longer a balance sheet driven by proving a point. My greatest asset is the calendar space I control. I'm investing time into learning to sail, an activity with riskier assets that Robert would panic over, but which requires my complete skill and self-determination. The financial solvency I fought for granted me emotional solvency. I now have the capacity to handle emotional stress without collapsing back into old, toxic dynamics. The boundary is so strong that their occasional, passive-aggressive communication is met with quiet, professional composure. My integrity now extends beyond business. I use my power and my voice to advocate for financial literacy among young women. I'm teaching them that their determination is their first, most important asset, more vital than any inheritance. My parents defined practicality as eliminating risk. I define it as strategically managing risk for exponential growth. The strategy that gave me my triumph was the willingness to bet on my own skill when no one else would, especially not my own family. The seven-figure commissions from the deal weren't spent on frivolous luxury. They became the foundation for the Kendra Gonzales Fund for Self-Determination, a seed funding group for female-led, high-growth startups. My success now fuels others' triumph. My relationship with Lucas remains professional, but strong. We talk quarterly about his fund performance. He is building his own power on a foundation of merit, not approval. That is the truest emotional redemption I could have hoped for. Remember, setting a boundary isn't shutting people out, it's choosing who you let in. The vast majority of my time is spent with people who celebrate my determination, not audit my worth. This is the difference between living under a burden and flying free. I recently bought a small piece of land near the coast, an entirely unnecessary asset under Robert's practicality, but a necessity for my peace. I named the LLC Self-Determined Ventures. It's a daily, tangible reminder of my final triumph. The occasional flicker of despair or sadness about the past still exists, but it's quickly overcome. I remind myself that my strategy succeeded where my emotional self failed. My adult integrity protected the wounded child. That protection is my deepest solvency. My parents still operate with a sense of superiority, but I simply don't care. Their approval is financially worthless and emotionally bankrupt. I learned that the greatest freedom is indifference to the opinions of those who refuse to see your power. My legacy won't be the size of my fund, but the clarity of my boundary and the success of Lucas. It's the proof that you can take the rejection and weaponize it into an unstoppable determination, a force that rebuilds your life and passively saves theirs. I recently reviewed the family's file. Robert's last note was simply, Lucas is recommending further allocation to growth asset class. Approved. No mention of me. A clean slate. The old ties have faded, replaced by professional respect and the quiet hum of success. My final advice on family revenge is this: make your strategy so clever, so financially robust, that the victory is passive, permanent, and serves your higher goal of self-determination. Don't aim for hurt, aim for solvency and peace. My life is the final triumph. I am free. Now, if they called tomorrow with a genuine, heartfelt apology, what would be the single, measured response I could give that honors my hard-won boundary while still acknowledging the quiet, residual connection? My story is proof that family revenge doesn't have to be loud, destructive drama. It can be a high-level financial strategy, a masterclass in establishing a permanent boundary. It's the ultimate act of self-determination, funded by my own hard-won asset. Lesson 1: you must redefine power. My family sought power through approval and tradition. I found power through skill and the resulting solvency. Power is the ability to walk away, to choose your dynamics, and to make your own financial reality undeniable. Lesson 2: integrity is the best long-term strategy. I used my ethical business practices to secure my high commissions, which became my ultimate leverage. Don't compromise your integrity for spite. Your ethical asset is the most powerful weapon against their toxic superiority. Lesson 3: achieve triumph first, then apply empathy. Once I was financially solvent, I could see their rigidity as fear, not malice. My final act, helping Lucas and passively saving their portfolio, came from a place of secure emotional redemption, not lingering despair. Lesson 4: your new practicality must be non-negotiable. My parents valued low-risk practicality. I value freedom-oriented practicality. Don't let their definition of riskier assets define your safe path to success. Set your new standards and enforce them with unyielding determination. Lesson 5: the final step is realizing connection is a choice. My true connection remains with Lucas, built on respect and shared skill. The old ties faded because they were conditional on my seeking their approval. Build your own tribe that values your self-determination. This journey wasn't just about financial success, it was about emotional liberation. Now, I want to hear from you. What is the single, most important financial asset you are building right now to secure your own boundary and achieve your ultimate triumph? Share your stories of self-determination in the comments below.